This is Mark McNeese, and you're listening to One Thing or Another, interviews and conversations. Welcome to the One Thing or Another podcast. This is your host, Mark McNeese here, and today I have a guest who is also a little bit of a neighbor and a fellow author. His name is Philip William Stover. He splits his time between Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and New York City. Philip has an MPS in interactive telecommunications and an MFA in writing. He's a clinical professor at NYU. As a freelance journalist, his essays and reviews have appeared in Newsday, The Forward, the Tony Awards, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Houston Chronicle, Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and other national publications. Now, Philip, say hello, and then I just want to say a little bit more about how I found you.
Sure. Hello.
Hello. My husband Frank reads the Bucks County Herald. I pick it up for him at the giant grocery store in New Hope where I work. I live in Jersey, as everybody knows who listens to this. And he said, "Oh, look here. There's an article about a gay romance writer in the area." And that's how I found you. And I looked you up, and here we are.
Here we are. The Bucks County Herald is one of the most important publications in the area. When we first moved here, we found it for the first time at the Giant, although the one in Blumsteadville, and the headline for that week was "Blueberry Scones Run Out Quickly at Farmers Market." And that was the front page article of the newspaper, and we thought this is going to be a great place to live.
I like the Herald. I've read it a few times, and actually they did a couple of things on my books too. So Frank, he acts as my publicist, and he says, "Oh, he's got a new book." And I met the editor one time, a woman. But that really caught my eye, and it also the fact that you're writing a gay romance series set in New Hope.
Right. It's set just in a New Hope that is very real. There are some very real things, and then there are some very fictional things that I create about that New Hope.
Now, before we start, let's get a little bit of the 411 on you, a little bit about you, your life, and also I'm curious how you ended up in New Hope, Bucks County.
Sure. I'm a writer and a teacher, and I've written I've ghosted for a best-selling author. I've written a number of series for Simon & Schuster for children, and now I'm writing gay romance. And I live in Bucks County, but I also live partly in New York because I teach at NYU.
That was another commonality we had because Frank and I lived in New York City for 25 years, and we had an apartment in Gramercy Park and a house here in Kingwood, in New Jersey, and we would come out on the weekends, which I got really tired of doing, by the way. I was really over the drive. And then he retired. My company closed their New York City office, and we said, okay, now's the time. We sold the apartment in New York. But do you have any plans to do that, or are you going to keep commuting?
For now, we continue to commute. It started off as a weekend place for us as well. And my husband worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for many, many years. And now he's a professor at Lehigh University, where he's also the director of the galleries there. So his life changed. My job didn't change at all. But I suddenly had a commute, which was very odd because our life relocated mostly to Bucks County, and I am in the city about 2 or 3 nights a week in normal times.
Do you have an apartment there, or do you?
We do. We have a tiny little apartment on the Upper East Side, and it is my little sanctuary there for 2 or 3 nights. And my husband's in the city often too because he's working with galleries or whatever art things are happening there. So we really do. I say I have 3 homes. I have our house in Bucks County, a little spot in New York City, and the Trans Bridge bus, which I spend a lot of time on in normal times again.
Yeah, because they stopped running out, at least at New Hope.
Before, though, I was on the Trans Bridge bus, and I would take that. Sometimes I would be able to take the casino bus, which goes from the Port Authority to the casino in Bethlehem, which is where Lehigh is. My husband would pick me up there. So I'd go right off the bus, and you have to spend the money. So I would play the slots, and sometimes I would win back my bus fare, sometimes not. And sometimes I was just able to break even or make more.
I was really not happy about Transbridge not running. I understand why they're not, but I have a good friend. He and his partner live in the city, and he would come out every 2 or 3 months. And we haven't. It's August. August was the last time they came out, and they had to take a train to another location. And I hope that it starts running again, because that's how Frank and I would go to the city once we moved here. I really don't like driving into the city.
Yeah, I hope a lot of that will come back, and the Transbridge bus is really a necessity. So I hope so too.
Now, before we get into your writing, what do you teach?
At NYU, I teach a bunch of courses, of course, but mostly I teach writing, and I teach a course that's called City as Text. It's a junior year seminar in our program that looks at New York City from a variety of perspectives, and it's taught in our campuses, our away campuses, also the same course at the same time, and the instructors work together. So it's taught in New York and in Florence and London and Shanghai and other cities around the world. And that's mostly my responsibility there in terms of teaching.
Is that something you plan on doing indefinitely?
I think so. I've friends who want to be or aspire to be or are full-time writers, but I like teaching. I like having a place to go. I like being at the university. So I don't think I would do one or the other.
Last question on that. Did you have to do this remotely during the last year?
Mm-hmm. We've been remote for almost coming on the anniversary of a year. So all of our instruction, all of my work at NYU has been remote.
All right. Now, with the journalism, by the way, I worked at Reuters for 11 years in the editorial department. I was not a journalist. I was the executive assistant to the global managing editor. So that was another thing that struck me, because you had written for a lot of papers. I don't know if you wrote for the print or the online, but that stuck out to me too. Now, how did you end up choosing New Hope as a second home or third home?
I grew up in New Jersey, and as a child, I always knew of New Hope. It was in the regional atmosphere, and I actually, when I was very young, I appeared for a summer at the Bucks County Playhouse in a musical, and I was pretty young, maybe 10 or 12, and that was my first real taste of New Hope, and this is in the 80s, so it was definitely in full swing, and I always loved my memories of that and also the town. And then my husband and I like to camp, and one year we were camping at Bowles Island, not too far from you, which used to have camping a couple of years ago, and it was one of those camping trips where it just started pouring rain. It was just pouring, and there was no possible way to sit in a tent all day. So we started exploring the area. We really fell in love with Doylestown and the Michener and the tile works and the atmosphere, and just everything here became so beautiful. And I'd always, from growing up in the area, knew about Bucks County as sort of a pastoral ideal and as a place of, where the Hammersteins were and Dorothy Parker, and as a creative sort of retreat. I knew that it was ideally located on the river between Philadelphia and New York. So when we looked for another house, we sort of drew that circle around New York, as people do. And we just really wound up liking Bucks County more than anything else. And then we found our little house here, and we, became Bucks County Ians, or whatever one is called.
Now, I'm guessing that you do go to Lambertville sometimes.
We do.
I love Lambertville, and we will park We always park in Lambertville and walk across the bridge to New Hope because there's no free parking in New Hope anymore.
Right. And parking is an issue, which when I wrote The Beautiful Thing Shop, I wasn't really thinking about it, the reality of it. But as it turns out, a central plot point is the destruction of historic buildings to replace them with a parking deck, which is exactly what is happening in New Hope as we speak.
Oh my God! Yes, they got rid of the
There's
Raven.
lots of controversy around that, and they're going to build another one downtown, apparently, or there's some debate about it. There's a lot of, I think, civic unrest, which is exactly what happens in the book. So I should find a way to capitalize on that more, but I have yet to crack that nut.
Every time I drive by the Raven and I see a parking lot now, it's just kind of, well, everything changes, but it's still sad.
Yeah.
Romance. What's your connection to romance? Is it something you enjoyed reading, throughout the years? How did you become a LGBTQ gay romance author?
I grew up reading romance as a kid. It wasn't something my mother read romance, so they were often the books around, and I picked them up and really liked them. But of course, I was a gay boy reading romance, which was sort of a strange thing, and I often tell the story of having to rip the covers off them when I brought them to school, because if I did, people would be like, why are you reading these girl books? But I really liked them. So I ripped the covers off and read them secretly and privately for a very long time. And then as an adult, I ghosted for a woman who wrote not necessarily romance. I think it was women's fiction, probably is a better way to categorize it. And then I wrote children's books for tweens, middle grade novels. And I wrote in first person as a 13-year-old girl, but I had written for this other author in first person female adult, so it seemed easy to me. They were like the books I had read. And then in my algorithm on Amazon or Audible or somewhere online, a gay romance popped up, and I read it, and I really liked it, and I wanted to read more by the author. And I discovered that the author of this gay male romance was a woman, and I went to look for more and realized that 90%, I'm guessing, are written by women, and it was hard. It was actually challenging to find books written by men, of gay men, in the genre. And I thought, well, one way to do, I seem to have all the ingredients to be ready to do this, so I started doing that. At the same time, Karina Adores was starting at Harlequin and HarperCollins, and even though my agent is a children's agent, I sort of wrote this up and kind of gave her a curveball, but that's how we got there.
I was going to ask you Karina, if they reached out to you or you pitched to them, or what
No,
happened.
I pitched it to them. I mean, I was and still am nobody in the romance world, but I really wanted to sort of. It is the backbone of publishing, they say. Mm-hmm. Romance is huge. Romance sells books. Romance readers read and buy books. It is a huge industry, and has been always. Was when I was a kid or a young adult reading it, and I've read it throughout the years. I just didn't know there was. I literally did not know there was this genre building.
Right, and I'm not a romance reader, so I'm not really that well versed on that world, but I do know, as a gay mystery writer, that the MM romance was really pretty much invented by women writers writing for other women, and I applaud you for being a male romance writer.
I think it's important to have authentic own voices writers in that field, and it is you are right, it is a field dominated by that, and it's super hard to break into it and find readers. I think that as gay men, I grew up reading, and then as an adult, one is drawn to books that represent who they are, of course, and at the time when I was reading in like the 90s as an adult and the early 2000s, the books were really dominated by AIDS. The characters died at the end. Like there was always a death in them. And when you're looking to read at that age commercial fiction, you're looking for something a little different that doesn't have that. And while those narratives are certainly important and were very necessary at the time, there just wasn't commercial gay fiction. There's literary fiction. There's always been Edmund White, the book Less that's out now, Call Me by Your Name. These are all really literary fiction gay novels, and we've always had those. But we haven't had our own commercial fiction, whether it be mystery or romance. And I think that's because there's a long generation who kind of never had those books. They weren't available. There was always literature, but there wasn't commercial fiction. So for me, my quest is to find those readers and find the gay men who might enjoy this type of book, who are looking for books that are about romance, but also about selfhood, about the specific obstacles gay people have in finding romance and becoming whole that are different than what people might imagine them to be or than other communities have, and also about the pleasure of reading about. I mean, I grew up reading romance because they often took place in other places, and I loved reading about other countries and travel and things like that. So a sense of place is really important to me, and I hope there will be other gay men and others in the spectrum who will find these books.
Well, I hope so too. And before I ask you about your two books, in the mystery world, the gay mystery world, also now for the last few years, if you go back 8 years or so when I wrote my first one, there were a lot of gay male mystery writers. You mentioned Own Voices, and there's a whole that's a whole topic for conversation among gay mystery writers, because some of the women, not necessarily the ones who wrote romance, but women have started writing what they're calling mystery. So now, if you go onto Amazon and you type in gay mystery or LGBT mystery, at least half the books, maybe 3/4 of the books, are all written by women. So it can be a touchy subject.
It is a very touchy subject, and it's very it's complicated. As someone who, as a writer, I don't want to say to anyone they can't write books.
Yeah.
As a reader, I don't want to say to anyone they can't read books. But I also think, where do we get our ideas about authenticity from books is very important. I would ask readers of any community, if you read books only about a community that interests you, and all those books are not written by people in that community, you might want to think about how you can expand your bookshelf.
Right.
And that is, and then as a gay male writer, my responsibility is to write books that are authentic. Like that's what I can do, and read them and promote them and connect to other people doing that. For the women that I know writing romance are absolutely, the ones I know are really lovely, wonderful writers. But there is some complication in it with gay men. And I'm just figuring it out myself. I didn't know that it was a phenomenon in mystery also, but no one wants to have their community feel fetishized. No one wants to have their community have books that are based on stereotypes and how they imagine someone like that might be and only imagine it. I think writing and reading books from lived experience is an important part of all literature.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. Now, talk to me about Seasons of New Hope, because it's a series.
It is, and it's a book that was started off in summer, and the most recent one starts off in winter, and they are very much small town romances. I wanted to write books about since growing up in the area, and you too went to New York City, and as a gay man at that time, going to New York was what, if you could, you did. Like there wasn't any question that I had to leave. There wasn't a place for me in the town I grew up in. But I loved it. Like I love country fairs. I love vintage flea markets. I love apple pick, all the kind of countries. I am not ashamed to say I like going to Kohl's. I am no stranger to a Home Goods. Which is not really, the coolest gay thing in the world to do, but I can admit it. I am comfortable out here. I love being in the city too, and very comfortable there. But I never thought there was a place for me in this world. I never thought there was a place for me at a country fair. And, I think there is now in many ways. Not, we are not 100% safe, but there are many ways we are. And I wanted to write books about a small town where being who you were was just who you were. There's no real controversy over that. It doesn't matter who you are in this book. People are just like, okay, that's who you are. There's no there are conversations about it, but it is a world that I wanted to create of complete acceptance that is it is over the top in these books. The tapestry is very sparkly, and that was intentional.
And you've got 2 books out in the series now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say a little about, you got the Hideaway Inn and the Beautiful Things Shop?
Sure. The Hideaway Inn is about a guy who, growing up, loved poetry. He was called Skinny Vinny and was teased and picked on and bashed throughout his high school career. And he leaves the New Hope area, or he's from New Jersey, actually. He leaves New Jersey and is about to return, and he has spent his life really making sure he created an identity that no one could pick on, that no one could belittle. No one was going to make him feel small again. And so he really thinks that the issue that prevented him from being accepted was that he was never able to be a man in the way the people around him in his town wanted him to be a man. So he becomes a man and returns to town and meets the farm boy who kind of broke his heart in high school, thinking the farm boy is going to be super impressed at the tough guy, hard-ass alpha male he's become, and the farm boy is not impressed at all. And it's about how this character, sort of Vince, comes to terms with the fact that being a man isn't necessarily just about protecting yourself and making yourself safe. It's about finding out who you are on your own terms. And as he does that, he purchases an inn right in New Hope and is trying to sell it and earn a profit and go back to New York. But things change for that. And in the Beautiful Things Shop is a shop just down the block from the Hideaway Inn. And there are 2 guys. One is a 19th century antiques connoisseur who likes things like Victorian fans and ornate candlesticks and pewter. He's a collector of pewter. His name is Prescott, and he is stuck sharing the shop with a guy named Danny who collects Muppet lunchboxes and Beanie Babies and dolls and strange mid-century vintage things. And it's about how they completely clash and then have to work together to save 2 buildings in New Hope based on 2 actual buildings that are about to be destroyed for a parking deck, as I mentioned earlier. And it's what we call an opposites attract romance, with 2 very different personalities, but more importantly, 2 very different aesthetics.
Now, I have a question about rules of romance. I had wanted to ask you about that. Because isn't a happy ending mandatory?
Oh yes, that's not even up for debate or change. You must have what we call an HEA. There's always a happily ever after. There are some other pieces that might be manipulated or massaged, but not changed. Romance is incredibly strict, and I'd come from writing tween books where really there are no rules. There are structural narrative rules that most writers follow, but there are no rules. There's an ethos of the genre, like every genre, but of my experience writing, romance has the strictest rules.
That's interesting. Now, do you do you interact, engage with other romance writers?
Yes, I try to. There are lots of like I imagine mystery is the same way. There's lots of romance writers associations, and I have lots of good friends, and I do in children's literature also. I always say the best part of writing are the friends you make who are other writers who are, struggling and celebrating and working along with you. Sometimes I think I just write the books to kind of maintain my friendships with these people, to kind of have the fodder of conversation.
That is true. There's I have made a lot of mystery writer friends, a couple of romance folks, but a lot of them on Facebook and as a mystery writer myself. And there's a Facebook group for LGBT mystery writers, and so I've gotten to know a lot of them. Some of them are friends, but yeah, there's a whole thing out there,
It's great to connect.
Lesbian mysteries too. When we were talking a little bit ago about, I sometimes refer it to the colonization of the gay mystery space, but it doesn't happen in other genres. Like if you look up lesbian mysteries, you will not find a bunch of books written by men. It just doesn't work that way. So I've never quite understood what it is about gay men that is so fertile for that kind of thing. But
yeah, it's when I ask other like non-readers, I guess, or even readers of MM fiction, which I guess is different than gay fiction. I don't know if mystery has that distinction. So MM fiction, MM romance is male romance, and the domination of female writers in that. And gay romance is supposed to be a little bit different. But when I ask other gay people about it, they say, and it is gay men, I don't see it happening in lesbian or other areas on the spectrum. I always get like, oh, who cares? And I think, oh, well, I care. Yeah. It's important to me. And it's about, they talk about the conversation of making space. And that seems important to me. But I don't know why gay men are an area where it's like, it feels like, well, anybody can write that, right? It's like, well, I guess that's sort of. Funny. I don't feel that way. And it's like, and I have to say, look, there are great writers of all identities writing different things. Like some people can really do it, but some people also I have to admit, I certainly write lesbian characters, but if I were to write, a female lesbian romance, I don't know how authentic my voice would be, to tell you the truth. And I don't think I would. I might not do that for me unless I don't know. I guess I should reserve the right to do that in the future. But I think authenticity, like when I think of my books, it's like, they come from my experience as a gay man of struggling with identity, some issues of masculinity. And that first romance comes out of that because I had that experience, that specific experience to it. So I think it's important.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Now, it's a gorgeous day, I think, from what I can see we live in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to enjoy it. I hope you will too. And I want to thank you for coming on and talking to me. I mean, it's nice to talk to somebody who lives in the area and talk to you about romance, which I know almost nothing about. Although the term MM for me now is code for this could be written by anybody.
Well, you say you don't know anything about romance, but seems like you've been with your partner for a long time. So my hunch is more about it than you think.
I got my happily ever after. I will tell you
You got it. So you have it. It's part of your life. Now, I can say very clearly, I have not killed anyone. So
wow. I think about it all the time.
My relationship to mystery is much more distant than your relationship to romance. I'm just to the next page. You are a bit more distant for me. So I would argue that you already know about romance. It's right inside you.
Well, thank you very much for that. And thanks again for coming on the podcast. I'll send you a link and share it everywhere. And it was really, really nice to talk to you. And maybe one of these days when you're walking across the bridge to Lambertville and we're walking to New Hope, I'll go, oh, I recognize him.
Yes, exactly. We'll meet over the river.
Okay. Thanks, Philip.
Nice talking, Mark. Thank you.
Bye. This is Mark McNeese, and you've been listening to One Thing or Another, Interviews and Conversations.